Hello, my name is Sherry Rosencheck, and I'm a science teacher at Bearden High School. This is Activity 2 of the Summer Learning Series. The activities and handouts can be found under the Student Resources tab on the Knox County Schools website. We'd love for you to share your summer learning with us by tweeting at KCS Science. This lesson will focus on the unity and diversity of life and how populations change. If this video is hard to understand, turn on the closed captions if available. Adjust the playback speed to slow down the video. Consider watching it in short clips, pause, listen, and watch again. Ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk to that partner about what you heard and understood. Sometimes we will pause this video to complete questions on your handout, watch another video, or complete a Quizlet link. You can look for the pause button below to know when to pause this video and move to another activity. The handout that you need will be at knoxschools.org under the KCS at Home resources. Pause the video if you need to get that handout ready and meet me back here. Today we will be looking at the unity and diversity of life, thinking about how is all life the same? What characteristics do living things have in common? And what has led to the differences among living things? So how do the processes work that change life? How do populations change over time? How would a new trait appear in a population and then become more common in a population? Let's think back to Lesson 1 and connect this to your prior learning. In Lesson 1, you thought a lot about the central dogma of biology, or how the instructions in DNA are transcribed into RNA and then translated into proteins. So the DNA holding the genes or the genotype and instructions for the organism, but those genes and instructions are instructions for making proteins. And the proteins determine the traits of the organism. So the proteins determine the phenotype. The genes are the genotype. They determine the physical traits, the phenotype. So thinking back to the rock pocket mouse, you looked at fur color as the physical trait. The color of the fur was determined by a gene. And when that gene changed, the fur color changed. So we'll be looking not at the organism level, but thinking about how that could affect a population of mice and how the whole population could change. But it all goes back to the genes that are present in that population. So we will pause here and think about what you already know and some of the terms that you may be familiar with that we need to bring into our learning. So pause the video and go to the Quizlet link that's on your handout. If you're using an online handout, you can click right on the link. If you're using a paper handout, you can type in the shortened URL. So go ahead and complete that Quizlet. Don't worry if all the terms aren't familiar. We'll be using them throughout the lesson. So pause and come back here when you're done with the Quizlet. Welcome back. We'll be using some of those terms as we move forward and think about our new learning targets. We'll be thinking about how selective pressures, things in the environment, could cause a change or shift in the physical traits of a population. So how could environmental factors select for or against certain traits in a population? And we'll be using data to do that, using data as evidence to show that the physical traits of a population have changed. And that's because the genetic makeup of the population has changed. So we need to recall that a population is a group of the same species living in the same area. So it has to be organisms that could get together and share genes and be part of the same gene pool. So squirrels here and squirrels on the West Coast, not a part of the same population. So what is an example of a population that could change? Try to think of some group of organisms of the same species. How could they change over time? What are some examples you can think of? One example might be plants. Sunflowers, a field of sunflowers, changing over time to become taller as they compete and reach for the sun. Some of them may be producing more seeds than others over time. Maybe a group of rabbits in the same area at the same time. The group of rabbits could change to become faster, to have better hearing, to have fur that blended in with the environment. And our rock pocket mice from lesson 1. So a group of rock pocket mice, their fur color could change over time to better blend with their environment. Here are some more terms we should be familiar with before moving on. Pause the video here and go to your handout to find the table that lists these terms. Do your best to write your own definition for these terms in an example. If you can't complete them all, that's fine. We're going to review these terms, but go ahead and pause the video and do your best to complete the table. Welcome back. Now we're going to watch a short video that will go over these terms. As you watch the video, pause and complete your table, make any changes you need, and complete the terms you may have struggled with.
These days, scientists know how you inherit characteristics from your parents. They're able to calculate probabilities of having a specific trait or getting a genetic disease according to the information they have from the parents and the family history. But how is this possible? To understand how traits pass from one living being to its descendants, we need to go back in time to the 19th century and a man named Gregor Mendel. Mendel was an Austrian monk and biologist who loved to work with plants. By breeding the pea plants he was growing in the monastery's garden, he discovered the principles that rule heredity. In one of the most classic examples, Mendel combined a purebred yellow-seeded plant with a purebred green-seeded plant, and he got only yellow seeds. He called the yellow color trait the dominant one, because it was expressed in all the new seeds. Then he let the new yellow-seeded hybrid plants self-fertilize, and in this second generation he got both yellow and green seeds, which meant that the green trait had been hidden by the dominant yellow. He called this hidden trait the recessive trait. From those results, Mendel inferred that each trait depends on a pair of factors, one of them coming from the mother and the other from the father. Now we know that these factors are called alleles and represent the different variations of a gene. Depending on which type of allele Mendel found in each seed, we can have what we call a homozygous pea, where both alleles are identical, and what we call a heterozygous pea, when the two alleles are different. This combination of alleles is known as genotype, and its result, being yellow or green, is called phenotype. To clearly visualize how alleles are distributed amongst descendants, we can use a diagram called the Punnett square. You just place the different alleles on both axes, and then you figure out the possible combinations. Let's look at Mendel's peas, for example. Let's write the dominant yellow allele as an uppercase Y, and the recessive green allele as a lowercase y. The uppercase Y always overpowers its lowercase friend, so the only time you get green babies is if you have two lowercase y's. In Mendel's first generation, the yellow homozygous pea mom will give each pea kid a yellow dominant allele, and the green homozygous pea dad will give a green recessive allele, so all the pea kids will be yellow heterozygous. Then, in the second generation, where the two heterozygous kids marry, their babies could have any of the three possible genotypes, showing the two possible phenotypes in a 3-to-1 proportion. But even peas have a lot of characteristics. For example, besides being yellow or green, peas may be round or wrinkled. So we could have all these possible combinations: round yellow peas, round green peas, wrinkled yellow peas, and wrinkled green peas. To calculate the proportions for each genotype and phenotype, we can use a Punnett square too. Of course, this will make it a little more complex. And lots of things are more complicated than peas, like, say, people. These days, scientists know a lot more about genetics and heredity, and there are many other ways in which some characteristics are inherited, but it all started with Mendel and his peas.
So if needed, you can rewind this video and rewatch the TED Ed video. Work on adding to your definitions until you feel comfortable with these terms. We'll be using these moving forward. So the TED Ed video really focused how one organism would inherit its traits. We're now going to move our thinking to the population level and think about genes in terms of an entire gene pool in a population. So if we're thinking about fur color, we're not thinking about just one mouse's fur color and how it was inherited, but how the whole pool of alleles for that population could change. The frequency of the allele for brown fur could change compared to the frequency of black fur in that gene pool. How does this relate to your prior learning? In lesson 1, you thought about how DNA is the code for making proteins. And if that code changes, the protein changes. So what if the DNA mutates and a new allele is created? And a new fur color appears in a population. Does it help that organism, or is it not helpful adaptation for that organism? So we'll be thinking about how mutations in DNA can lead to new versions of a gene, new alleles, and how that frequency might change in a population. So how would you define evolution? Pause your video, go to your handout, and make an attempt to define evolution in your own words. Do not Google it, just do your best. In your own words, what does the term evolution mean in the biological sense? Pause your video and write your definition. You completed your own definition for evolution. How would you complete this definition? Evolution involves a change in the frequency of blank in a population over blank. How would you complete that? Evolution involves a change in the frequency of blank in a population over blank. How about the frequency of alleles in a population over time? What should you add or change to your definition after seeing this one? And how much time does it take for a population to evolve? How much time does it take for the frequency of brown fur in a population to change? Or the frequency of height of a plant to change? How much time would that take? Doesn't that depend on the generation time of the organism, the reproductive rates, the maturity rates? So the time it takes for a species to evolve, or a population, a group of a species to evolve, would depend on all those things. So what would evolve faster or have the potential to evolve faster? Bacteria or elephants? Of course, bacteria can evolve much, much faster because their generation times are so short, their reproductive rates are so high. So time is really going to be based on generation time when it comes to a population evolving. There are different mechanisms that can lead to populations evolving or changing over time: natural selection, artificial selection, and genetic drift. This lesson will focus almost entirely on natural selection. So pause the video and you will watch another video on natural selection. The link to the video is located on your handout. So if you're working on an online handout, you can just click the link to the Edpuzzle video. If you're working on a paper handout, you should be able to type in the shortened URL to get to the video. While you're watching this separate video, it will stop and ask you questions along the way. When you are finished, return here. I hope you enjoyed that video. In the video, you should have learned that in order for natural selection to occur in a population, there have to be these three things present. There has to be variation in the population, some differences in the population. That variation, or those differences, have to be heritable and be able to be passed on to future generations. And there have to be selective pressures in the environment that would be selecting for or against that heritable variation. We're about to revisit those rock pocket mice from lesson 1. But first, let's think about what are some examples of selective pressures from the environment. Factors from the environment that would select for or against different traits. So some examples might be mate selection. For example, in many bird species, the male has traits that are adaptations to attract a female mate. So mate selection is a selective pressure that's selecting for certain traits in that population. Competition. In many populations of a species, there's some competition for limited resources. So maybe competing for prey, competing for sunlight for plants. So that often can be a selective pressure from the environment that is selecting for or against certain traits in a population. Abiotic factors, which I just listed, one is sunlight, right? And that plants might be competing for. And predation. And predation is going to be the area of focus, or the selective pressure of focus in the activity that you're about to complete. So you will transition now to an extended activity on natural selection using the rock pocket mouse as a model example. So pause the video here and go to your handout for an extended activity on rock pocket mice and natural selection. Welcome back. It would be important for you to check your answers when we're done here with this video. The key is posted under the Student Resources tab, and you will need to check your answers against the key. Changing your answers to add more ideas, revision will be the key to your learning process. So make sure to review the key and add to your answers. So your rock pocket mouse activity focused exclusively on natural selection as the mechanism for evolution that was driving change in that population. But natural selection is not the only force that can cause a population's allele frequency to change. Another example would be resistance. For example, antibiotic resistance. So maybe you start off with a population of bacteria, and then you treat those with antibiotics. There's variation in that population. Maybe this one was resistant to that antibiotic, so it survives. And time goes on. These die and are killed by the antibiotic. This one lived. It is resistant. It copies itself. It reproduces and passes on that trait, that gene that made it resistant to the antibiotics, leading to a new population of bacteria, or a population of bacteria with a much different allele frequency for that resistant gene. So that's one example of another mechanism of evolution. Then artificial selection. For example, dog breeds. Nature did not select for all of these different breeds to arise from their one ancestor. So we artificially selected for those traits. The little Chihuahua here was not selected for by natural forces. These are examples of artificial selection. Our crop plants are examples of artificial selection and allele frequency, or versions of genes, changing over time in a population. Genetic drift. Genetic drift is another force that can cause a change in the allele frequency of a population. But this would be the result of chance, and it would affect small populations. These are things you can explore more at the end of this lesson. So let's reflect on our learning. Our learning targets were to explain how selective pressures in the environment could cause shifts in the physical traits of a population, and to use data to describe how changes in the environment affect the physical traits of a population. So how would you explain how populations change? What is something you would still like to learn about evolution? Pause the video and summarize your learning at the end of your handout. Before we close out our lesson, let's explore some possible next steps. In Lesson 3, you will focus on biodiversity, or the different types of life, and we've been thinking about how changes in populations could lead to that diversity of life. So what more could you learn about how populations change? You could start by exploring the answers to your reflection questions. You could also visit NOVA's Evolution Lab. The link is on your handout. They have some amazing resources, and they have a game that's awesome, and students often get hooked on this game. So I'll take you to the site and model the game a little bit for you. So when you go to log into the site, it may ask you to set up an account. You can do that if you want to save your progress in the game, or you can just click to enter as guest, but just know that it won't save your answers as you go. There are other resources here. The videos are great, but I'm going to take you into the game. This video is amazing. Highly recommend you watch this Evolution 101 video. But we're going to start here with the trees. And there are several different missions to go through. Again, if you want to save your answers as you go, you'll need to set up an account. So I'm going to start with Training Tree 1. I'm going to go ahead and take you into the game though, and we'll start with this Mission 1. It'll give you some organisms down here, some species, and some traits. And it tells you to drag the two into the center of the screen to start building your tree. So I'm just going to drag them up here and place them somewhere in this tree. And I join them together because I know that they're going to be related to each other somehow. And I need to put this trait onto the tree. So does just the gecko have cells with nuclei, just the palm tree, or do they both have cells with nuclei? And I just know that they both have cells with nuclei, so I placed that trait way back here so that it shows they could both have that trait. So it says if you've solved the puzzle correctly, all the circles above the tree will be filled in. So I know that I got it right, and it tells me good job. Then it gives me another organism down here that I need to add to my tree. If I don't know where to put this organism, I need to find out more. So I can click the magnifying glass. And if I want to know more about the palm tree, I can click on that, right? Or I can go and learn more about the gecko or this fungus down here. So I want to learn more about this guy. So I can see that it has cells with nuclei. It's a heterotroph. It's not photosynthetic, can't make its own food using sun. So I learned some things about this organism. So it is not photosynthetic. So where should I put the photosynthetic trait? I'm thinking that that belongs over here with just the tree. And that's correct, right? I got my correct. And so where should I put this? I know that it's heterotrophic, and so is the gecko. So I'm going to put it over here. And then I'm going to put my trait here because it's true of both of them. It's not true of just the fungus. It's not true of just the gecko. It's true of both of them. So that's the first tree complete, and it asks me a question. Is an animal or a plant more closely related to the fungus? Well, the fungus is over here by the gecko. So, and it shares this trait. So these two are more closely related. So the fungus more closely related to the animal. And check my answer. Nice job. So that's the first tree. You can go on to explore more and go to the next game and the next game, and there are more. And it gets quite complex, and you learn a ton of things about organisms and their shared traits and how they've changed into all of the diversity of life, which is where you're headed in lesson 3. So I hope you'll explore some of these resources. They're lots of fun and are great resources to check out. That's it for our lesson today. I hope you learned a lot about how populations change, and make sure you share what you learned with us by tweeting at KCS Science. Have a wonderful summer. I hope it's filled with learning and adventure. Thank you.